Welcome to this iWorld Live event in our iWorld Live studio. This is very exciting for us. This is our first day shooting, and we have an excellent guest. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you. This is AnnMarie Hipsley, and there's this term that I heard for the first time this year, okay? I had heard of in vivo and in vitro, and people talk now about doing studies in silico, and that is what this new technology enables. So you've done, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm going to be wrong, you've done computer modeling of everything that happens during the accommodative process. Am I right about that? It's not
Yes.
just a reconfirmation of the lens. There are a lot of moving parts with that
Correct.
too. Spell it out for me.
So we started with the Dan Goldberg, who published the computer animated model of accommodation and published it in JCRS. And he did an excellent job taking the last decade or so of literature and putting it into a visual that represents biometric changes that occur during an accommodation. Now, while that's biometric, it's not mathematical. So we took it a step further with the University of Virginia, and we were able to build a finite element model of the essential elements, every geometric property, plus importing physics and stress and strain properties into probably one of the most complicated models that was ever built at the muscle lab in University of Virginia. We were able to put all the fiber directions of the muscles so that we could actually turn on or turn off one or two different variant force muscles that those muscles create, which is very interesting because you can't do that in a lab and you can't do that in a human. And we were able to recreate accommodative postures, if you will, of the lens at various ages from young to old. And this was extremely intuitive to the point where we got excited that we potentially could test the utility of this model and do some virtual clinical trials.
So really interesting. So when I was growing up, we talked about the lens and we talked about Zonials, but Zonials they're not sort of one uniform thing that all does the same thing, right?
They're extremely complex. Professor Luton-Dreckel has done 40 years of work at least, and recently published that even the anterior zonular fibers actually have a neurosensory reflex, and they actually monitor the posture of the lens and the lens capsule, and they're extremely complex, and they actually feed into the ciliary ganglion, which then feeds into the larger ganglion, the brain. So one can imagine that we underestimated these zonules.
Yeah, really cool. So if you've created this complex model with fidelity that is sort of bar none, it's just a curio unless there are applications for it. So that's exactly what you're doing, right?
Correct.
You're doing in silico.
To implant virtually our first accommodating intraocular lens. A lot of companies have come to us and said, can we see how our lens works? And we can actually see where the haptics are either wrong or right, if the movement is either wrong or, and give some feedback to what those results might be when you implant them in an expensive clinical trial.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. And you say that there's the potential with this model to even look beyond that.
Sure. Since we have a whole eye model, we're not just focusing on the lens. The extralenticular components, the zonules, the ciliary muscles, which are the only dynamic moving part of it. If we don't have the muscle force, we have nothing. But they do a lot. They circulate aqueous. They contribute to opening and closing schlems. And we're looking at also implanting some MIGs into our sclera. And also we're evaluating scleral therapies and how they work.
Fascinating. Scleral therapies, you used a term off camera that I'd never heard, which is a microporation. Do I have that right?
Yes. So laser scleral microporation is a relatively actually new this year technology, which Dr. Bobby Ang is going to be speaking about. Dr. Mitch Jackson, Dr. Sunil, or Prof. Sunil Shah are all giving papers at the Presbyopia Symposium on that technology.
Well, I look forward to hearing more about that. But I've first of all, you've been so generous talking about what you've talked about. I don't want to keep you captive, although I want you to know that I'm tempted. Uh, AnnMarie, I want to thank you for bringing what prima facie looks like a simple topic, demonstrating that it's very complicated, and then demonstrating how you are managing it. It's fascinating, fascinating stuff. And as I said, for the generosity of the time that you've shown us. And I want to thank you, our live audience, for participating in this live iWorld event in our new gorgeous studio. Thank you for coming.
And thank you.